G'day YouTube, welcome back to part 3 of the SCX24 Injora rock buggy build. I've made some pretty big changes to the truck since the last video based on some information that became available after Adam from Cape Crawlers did a build video on his truck. He also struggled with where to mount the electronics and ended up mounting them in the back on the battery tray, which he wasn't very satisfied with. It's not an ideal location. Some discussion about the intended location of those electronics came up in the comments for that video. Someone mentioning that Injora has some instructions, an instruction sheet for this vehicle, which they do, but it's pretty much an exploded parts diagram of how everything screws together. It doesn't give you any suggested locations for the electronics. But I did manage to I emailed Jeff from Injora and asked him for a link to those instructions, and he was able to provide a link to those instructions, which will be in the comments section down below if anybody wants to download those and take a look at them. Somebody in the comments mentioned that the electronics are supposed to mount up front under this cowling area. So I tore the buggy all the way back apart again and sort of had a look into what was required for that to happen, and there is indeed enough space to mount those electronics up front. We can see from underneath the controller sits right above the upper links there. The setup is a lot cleaner. I don't know if you can see through the window there, but everything sits down a lot lower. It's a lot more tucked away. The inside of the vehicle looks heaps cleaner, and there is actually enough space to run the interior panel if you decided to. With this battery is a bit larger than a stock SCX24 battery, and when this panel's in there, it kind of sits up on top of the battery a little bit. But if you had a smaller battery, there's plenty of room for this interior panel to fit now, which is pretty cool. So what I want to do is remove the front and side panels so we can get a bit more detail on how we squeeze those electronics in there. So with those panels removed, you can see the controller sits double-sided taped right onto this front brace area. It has to be, the front edge of the controller has to be level with the front edge of this brace so that you've got room back in here for the electronics connectors where the servo and the light bar connects onto the speed controller there. If you run that controller more forwards, there's not enough room to get your servo plugged in, so it's a little bit fiddly getting the position correct, but there is just enough room in there. As you can see, you can actually access the switch for the vehicle with all the panels and everything on. You can just get your finger in there and switch the vehicle on and off, which is a big improvement from the way I had it set up before. Side view, you can see how low that controller sits down in the front of the vehicle. It puts a lot more weight over the front of the truck as well. I did notice that with the controller mounted there and no weight on this side of the vehicle, it did sort of sit on a slight angle. These springs, the stock SCX24 springs, are very soft, and with the weight of the motor just off the center line of the vehicle, the vehicle sort of sagged off to the side from the weight of that motor. So what I was able to do is just put a small wheel balance weight, it's just a 1/4 ounce, right on the vehicle's center of gravity and stuck to the lower skid there, and that pretty much made it so that the vehicle sat nice and level. It's a little bit fiddly, if we can see underneath there. It's a little bit fiddly getting your battery and motor wiring routed, because they connect to the controller right up under the front here. So you've got to connect those before assembling this panel, which is a little bit tricky, but with a little bit of fiddling about and a couple of cable ties to route the cabling, it all fits in there pretty nicely. And the wiring for the LED light bar can be tucked down with the servo wiring next to the motor. It's just a much cleaner install. The vehicle's center of gravity is ultra low. Check this out. You can do that on both sides, just balance on the side like that. So that's a pretty good indication of how low that CG is. This vehicle does have a bit of weight up front. It's got brass knuckles, a brass front diff cover, and brass rings inside the wheels. So that does put a little bit of weight over the front. The back just has a brass cover and no weights in the wheels at all, just the stock aluminium inner rings. So it's got, I haven't really measured it, I haven't weighed it front to back, but it balances right about there on the skid. So the balance point's pretty much lined up with this screw here, which is just slightly forward of the center line of the truck. So I think it climbs pretty well, which I'll show you in a little bit with this test ramp that I made this morning. At the moment I'm running these Injora 58mm crawl master tires, or crawler master tires, whatever they call them. These tires I've run before on my SCX24, and they are a nice tire. I like the size of them. The rubber compound's good. They're very soft, but the tread pattern is very tightly spaced, and they don't tend to hook up on the rocks as well as I would like. So I think what I'm going to do is test out, I've got the new Proline Trencher tires for the SCX24. I think I'm going to use those. They're a tiny little bit smaller. They're a 57mm tire instead of a 58mm tire, but I think they'll be a really good size for this vehicle. The tread pattern is really aggressive. They came out of the packaging feeling really slimy and strange, like there was some mold release compound on it, or you could touch the rubber and then rub your fingers together and it felt like it had a layer of silicone spray on it or something. It was really weird. I sprayed them off with some simple green and rinsed them in some warm water, and they've got a much stickier feel to them. They've lost that strange sliminess. So if you do get a hold of some of these Proline Trenchers, I would recommend washing them first to get rid of that greasy, slimy feel. But I'm going to initially run the vehicle with these on it and test it out. We'll cover those Proline Trenchers in a separate video. Okay, we're all back together with the side and front panels back on. I've put some Axial Racing and some Injora stickers on there just to break up that green paneling. I think the black and green looks really cool. We're all ready to run. The LED light bar plugs into the controller in exactly the same way as the stock SCX24 lights plug into the V2 controller, so they can be controlled from the transmitter in exactly the same way, which is nice. I don't really like running the lights all the time. It's cool to be able to decide when you want to run the lights. I've got the stock deadbolt here. I did want to make a note for the people who are using the V1 electronics. The positioning of the switch and the motor and battery connectors and all of the servo wiring, the position of that on the controller looks exactly the same as the V2. So I don't see a problem if you were converting over an SCX24 that uses the V1 electronics. I don't see a problem with mounting that in the front here exactly the same way I've got it mounted up there. So that's pretty cool to note, that both V1 and V2 electronics will work with this little truck. I'm going to move you guys over to the other end of the bench. We're going to take a look at this incline ramp that I set up this morning and have a look at what sort of angles this buggy can drive with a fairly stock suspension setup. I haven't done a ton of tuning or tweaking or even driving with it yet, so we're just going to see how it performs as it sits right here. So I have this piece of scrap MDF mounted up in the vise there. I can adjust the angle of it. I put a piece of this grippy stair tread tape on it. It's set up at the minute. I'll show you with the bevel box in just a minute. I'll move the camera so that you can see how it's set up. The bevel box is zeroed out. As you can see there, it's pretty much at 58 degrees or 57.9 degrees, so close enough to 58. I've just had to switch out microphones. The Rode Video Micro that I was using for the first part of the video was producing a lot of crackling noises. I bought it used. It might be a faulty microphone, so I apologize for that. Hopefully the audio will be improved through this other microphone. I was doing some testing earlier and I brought the ramp up gradually to reach that 58 degree number, which is pretty impressive considering it's pretty much stock SCX24 suspension layout. Spring rates and everything are all completely stock. The red deadbolt that you can see in the background there, just as a comparison, was able to climb the ramp set at 50 degrees, so that's pretty impressive straight out of the box. These Injora Crawler Master tyres really do struggle to hook up even on this sandpaper type surface, but as you can see, a little bit of left front tyre lift. It really doesn't want to climb up there, but it's just balanced enough to do it. Which is a pretty, 58 degrees is a pretty impressive angle. I think with a little bit more adjustment and tweaking, you could certainly get 60 degrees out of this thing. We'll see if those Crawler Master tyres can hold it steady. It's very slowly sliding back. As you can see, pretty impressive performance out of this buggy. It's a huge upgrade over the performance of the SCX24. That about wraps up this build so far. I hope that has given you guys some information on how best to install the electronics in one of these buggies. It's pretty tight fit in there, so it's a little bit fiddly. It wasn't immediately obvious to me that the controller could fit up the front there, so hopefully that's useful. I will have a link for the instructions that you can download and print out in the description below. I'll also link the buggy frame kit and any other parts used on this build. I was going to close out with some running footage. It's starting to snow out there, so we'll see how that works out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed. Stay tuned for more content around the SCX24s. We're obviously going to be doing more testing with this new buggy kit. I've got some parts come in for the TRX4M, some brass to install to the front of it to sort of get the weight balanced out a bit better and get it crawling a bit better. We're going to be running these new Proline Trencher tyres. I think these are going to be an excellent fit for this buggy. Hopefully they grab onto the rocks a lot better than these Injora Crawler Masters do. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.